Hello, Kirk. How are you doing?
Doing well, Sheldon, and how about yourself?
I'm doing good. It is currently, as you're watching this stream, Thursday, the 31st of March. I am currently on a plane, and Kirk, who knows what he'll be doing, cutting wood or something.
Yeah.
Um, so we are pre-recording this as we did last week, and why don't we start up with some predictions? What is happening on Thursday, March 31st? That looking what a week and a half into the future from now, what could be happening? What's Putin doing?
Oh man, a week and a half from now, like given what's going on in Europe, it's anybody's guess. I mean, it could
We
be.
may not be here.
Yeah, it's the it's the you got it's like you're on a train and it's a runaway train and you have no idea what's around the corner, and that can be that's not the greatest way to live, I find. Um, the good news is that the days are getting longer and spring is here and they're getting warmer, and we already got some crocuses popping out behind our house.
I'm just excited to see some brown grass.
Yeah, our grass is still pretty brown, and I imagine yours must be brown too. But yeah, we do see grass out here, and there's green patches.
Yeah, we've got mostly snow, but there's a few areas where the grass in between all the large like drifts that we have around our fences and stuff. It's going to be some green and brown grass in there. So
I would predict that in two weeks' time, when people are actually watching this, that snow will be gone. That's my prediction.
That snow might be, but the new snow might not be yet.
Yeah,
because we usually get that last kick of the can. We're supposed to get some rain and snow today.
Yeah, you can get some pretty good snowstorms.
Yeah, that first week of April is always a risk.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, spring's pretty much here. I'm willing to go out and say that, and looking forward to it. We're getting a little bit of walk through the park yesterday, and where the ditches are for the storm, for the water to flow out of town here, it's full.
Yeah.
And so there's some potential flooding if it melts too quick here. But I noticed our snow has probably melted about 1.5 feet in the last few days.
Most of ours is gone, but the river down there in the valley is just about at flood stage. It's right up to the top of its banks, but not overflowing yet.
Good. Now, if it overflows, how far up is your house?
We're probably a good 100 feet above the river. So even if the dam broke upstream, which is just about 1.5 miles upstream, even if just completely disappeared in 5 seconds or one, that entire lake would come down here, and I think we'd still be safe because the valley broadens out at our point.
Okay. All right. Good to know. All right. So today we are talking about, well, since we mentioned what's going on in the world and stuff, makes me wonder when God created this universe, was it perfect? He said it was good.
Yeah. Well, it's perfect. I mean, it's he is perfection, flawless perfection. So it was perfect. And of course, there's going to be some huge issues people have with me saying this. And if you subscribe to just a completely materialistic worldview, and everything has to be explained from science and the way the world is right now, you will think that's ridiculous. But as I've already argued, there's a supernatural foundation for this world. And in fact, if there is, it would be surprising if there weren't supernatural interventions or activities that are supernatural that occur at least from time to time. And the creation of the world would be one of those. Now, people argue back and forth about exactly how that went. But the bottom line is this, is that God said that it was very good. But later on in the New Testament in the Bible, it says that all of creation is enslaved to corruption. It's all disintegrating. It's all coming apart. So something has happened between the time it was created in a flawless, perfect state, which we have no idea even what that's like, to the kind of world we live in now. Things have changed. The entire universe has changed.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. God, according to the Bible, spoke things into existence. And we don't know at what point natural order started taking over in terms of what things look like now, and different types of evolution occur, those kind of things. But when God created the world, he created man in his image, is what it says.
Mm-hmm.
So we look back, again, we don't know exactly what that looked like, but we do know that Adam was supposed to be, or was created to be, without death.
Yeah, like genetically flawless. We tend to gain anywhere from, let's say, 45 to 90 mutations per generation. A mutation is a mistake in the genetic information that codes for a person or a dog or a plant. So we tend to gain about anywhere from 45 to 90 mistakes per generation. So you cannot assume that basically there's a lot of things that we tend to assume about Adam before he became imperfect, or what a perfect human looks like. That's pretty tough to assume, because we have no idea how those mistakes have influenced all sorts of aspects of ourselves, our brain, for example, our physical longevity. There's a ton of things that probably have gone wrong since. In fact, I would go out on a limb and I would say that every single, I don't think this is much of a limb though, because my area of research has to do with proteins. And I will typically look for each protein. There are thousands of different sequences, which all represent mutations from whatever they started with. So I would say that every single gene in our DNA has flaws and mistakes in it. Now, fortunately, the genes are designed with a high degree of redundancy, so it can take a lot of random mistakes or mutations without a lot of harm in most sections of the gene, but sooner or later, the cumulative effect catches up with us. So
like, is an example of this, like, all of a sudden you'll see a lot of people getting more taller compared to what we were a few hundred years ago. There's a lot taller people, or is that just because people are eating different? Like, I'm trying to figure out when you're talking about mutations and mistakes. Like, I don't see a lot of people walking around with 6 arms. That'd be cool though. But
generally, a lot of mutations you won't see visibly. Some you will, but I wouldn't say the height is necessarily a result of mutations. I would say it's more of a result of healthy, very good nutrition that we experience now in comparison to what we did, let's say, even 200 years ago. So you will see that sort of thing, just due to health and nutrition. But and that doesn't change anything about the human species. It just means that you'll be maybe taller. But what we're looking at with mutations are things that, for example, we have a lot of mutations in genes that code for our brain. I remember reading there was a peer-reviewed article just a few years back that suggested that if you took the average human being today and went back, got in a time machine and went back to the time of Aristotle or Plato, the average human being today would look like they are significantly physically or mentally challenged in comparison to the average human, let's say, who lived 2,500 years ago. We have not improved brain-wise. We've gone downhill. Now, people will say, well, wait a sec. Like, look, we're inventing spacecraft and aircraft and computers and everything else. That is true, but it's not because we become smarter. It's because we have been able to devise ways of storing information and improve the speed of which we can access that information. And we've also got computers which can perform computations that formerly we could not do. for our limited brains. And so it's mainly a matter of information storage and retrieval coupled with computers, and that have made us that have allowed us to achieve these things, despite the fact we probably could not compete intellectually or mentally with someone who lived 2,500 years ago, simply because we have accumulated a lot more mutations in the brains that are in the genes that code for our brain.
Interesting. I had no idea about that.
Yeah.
So if you took somebody with that intelligence and you dropped them in today, are they just thinking at a faster speed? What does that look like?
Well, they would tend to have their memories would tend to probably be at the top of the charts for the average person today. It's not like they would stand out as beyond everybody, but they would certainly do well on, let's say, Jeopardy, that TV show Jeopardy. They would be like probably the regular champions. If you had 10 competing there, there's a good chance that all 10 would be coming back a lot of times. They would also be able probably to not only have to remember more things more thoroughly and in more detail, but they would probably also be able to think through things faster and with go faster and further than the average person thinks today. Now, some might argue, well, that's not setting a very high bar at all, and that's actually part of our concern today, is that a lot of people will say people just don't think today, and it's true. Now, a good chunk of that is due to intellectual laziness and the way that our education system has sort of deteriorated, but also partly due to we just have a harder time doing it.
And now we're talking about the ability to process knowledge, those kind of things. What about the wisdom aspect? Because that's not necessarily the same thing, is it?
No, it's not. I would say that knowledge is the accumulation of facts and data. Wisdom is knowing how best to use that to accomplish good purposes, to accomplish your ends in a better way, in a more pain-free way, in a more successful way than someone else. So knowledge is the accumulation of facts. Wisdom is the ability to know how to use that knowledge in the best way to accomplish your purposes.
Okay, so I'm just sort of brainstorming in my head here. This is how I operate. If we go back thousands and thousands of years, and we look at Adam, and even the first, even after Adam and Eve, you've got people at last that, according to the Bible, lived hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Being able to remember remember stories, remember a lot of what was happening, especially since there wasn't a lot of writing down what was going on.
Well, we don't know. We don't know necessarily. It depends what they wrote it on. I mean, if they carved it in rocks, but one thing I will say, though, is that people will look at these ages of, let's say, Adam or Enoch or Methuselah. Enoch actually didn't live that long. He only lived a few hundred, and then he disappeared. Mm-hmm. But the average age was around 900 years prior to the flood. And so people say, well, that's ridiculous. Look, nobody lives 900 years. But what they forget is that Adam and Eve were genetically flawless. There were no genetic problems, no mutations, and it was only they would start to accumulate during their lifetime and the generations that follow. But there are some implications for that. Number one is that probably aging would be radically slower if you're genetically flawless, because your bodily repair mechanisms would be right up to snuff. They'd be operating perfectly or near perfectly. Secondly, one of the problems with, let's say, marrying a close relative, let's say a sister or a first cousin, is that chances are, if you're closely related, you have the same mutation at in the same gene. And so when you bring those two genes together, you got a problem. Whereas more distant relatives or people who aren't related, chances are they won't have a mutation at that location. And so the way our genetics work is that if you got a flaw in one gene, your genetics, your your biology or the cell will tend to use the gene that still works. So you actually got a backup for all your genes. And a lot of times that saves the day. But sisters bearing brothers nowadays would be often a disaster. Whereas at the time of Adam and the first generation or so, that appears to be relatively normal right up into the time of Abraham, where he married his half-sister. Although by the time at Mount Sinai, God says, no more of that. And then he spelled out what qualifies as two close marriages, and for good biological reasons.
Okay, so this is very interesting. When we think of Adam and Eve, you got two genetically perfect people.
Mm-hmm.
I would say wisdom-wise, not 100% perfect.
Wisdom takes time.
And they were easily tempted into something. We're not going to get into what was the serpent's nature, anything like that. We won't deal with that later. There's some other live streams we've been talking about having around those kind of things. We don't want to go down that rabbit trail. So talk to me a little bit about what it looked like. Adam and Eve sin. They did something completely against what they were allowed to do. There was no whoops, I didn't mean to do that. It was very clear they meant to do it. And God says, you are going to die. This was the punishment. So in that space, like, I don't know if it's a science thing we can even, you can go into there, but what does that look like?
Well, it's actually, there's a lot of potential, very interesting things here. Okay, first of all, automatically, if Adam and Eve genetically became imperfect or mutations started to accumulate at that point, the whole natural system changed, then physical death would be just a natural consequence. It might not be, it could be a punishment, but it doesn't specifically say it's a punishment. God just says you're going to die. And it could be also a way for God to limit evil, in the sense that if a person has going down the wrong road, so to speak, morally or ethically speaking, the longer they live, the more knowledgeable and good they become at, let's say, crime, doing wrong things, bad stuff. But let's get back to the actual fall. What happened when, like, we don't really know. I mean, my theory is, and my theory is probably not worth the paper it's written on, but my theory is there was nothing inherently wrong with God says, don't eat any fruit of this tree over here. But the theory is that God set up a test. He set up and in chemistry, we can call it a catalyst. A catalyst, actually, you have a reaction going, but it takes a long time, and it's very expensive if it takes a long time. Mm-hmm. A catalyst speeds the whole thing up so that you can get your end result much quicker with much less resources and energy required, or pain and suffering in this case. So God sets up this potential catalyst. Adam goes for it. He does something wrong. He makes a decision, or even, you could, in scientific terms, in quantum mechanics, he makes an observation that he's not supposed to make. Now, why do I bring quantum mechanics into this? It's because a number of years ago, I was talking with, I was having breakfast actually with Quentin Smith, a very sharp atheist philosopher. And I said, hey, Quentin, let me run something by you here. And I mean, I haven't interacted much with Quentin Smith over the years. It was basically during a short period of that, a few years there. I said, okay, quantum mechanics suggests that the wave function, one way of looking at it, there's a wave function that governs the state of everything, including the entire universe. But one thing we know about quantum mechanics, if you want to measure the state of the wave function, if you want to make an observation, you can. What happens? You instantly collapse the state of that wave function to a simple state. Let's call it a simple state. Whereas before the collapse, it was in a superposition of states, or at least the physical system was in a superposition of states. And now the wave function has collapsed to determine a simple state for that physical system. So I said to Quentin, what would happen if what Adam did was actually make an observation or perform an experiment? Okay, God says, don't do this, But now I have some possible ideas of what might happen if I do it, and it seems kind of tempting to me. I think I'll do it. And so, in a sense, he made an observation. Now, if there is a wave function for the universe, and it included the situation where you could actually observe some aspect of that in reality, and Adam did that, then what would happen is it would instantly collapse the state of the entire universe down to a simple state rather than a superposition of states. Now, I may have lost a half a dozen people here.
Well, you lost me a bit, but I just hear super and simple, and they're not the same thing.
Now, here's the punchline. It would happen instantly, and it would happen with the entire universe. It wouldn't like travel outwards from Earth at the speed of light. No. If the universe is in this entangled state, that is, it had a common origin of some description, anything like that, then if the wave function of the universe collapsed to a simple state, then basically you have everything would be different instantly throughout the entire universe, and it wouldn't work the same anymore. And we have no idea what that superposition of state universe would look like. But one thing we can know is that if we use science today, we cannot reconstruct what the universe would have been like before the fall. Like we have no idea. We don't even know what the other states are. And certainly we don't know what those superposition of states are. We have no idea what a flawlessly perfect universe would be like. All we know is that if that happened, and that's just a simple, I'm not saying that's actually what happened. Quentin actually thought that was a very intriguing idea. He's a sharp-minded atheist. And what was interesting about it is that we now have, just from quantum mechanics, a way of explaining how the decision of just one observer, the observation made by just one person, if it has anything to do with the wave function of the universe, would instantly change the state of the universe.
So is that like butterfly effect type stuff, or is it beyond that?
Different. Yeah, this is different. Okay. Butterfly effect has to do with exponentially increasing consequences of a particular event. This is an instantaneous change in states of the entire system. But I just throw that out there because I find most people don't think deeply about these sorts of things, and a lot of them maybe not even know anything about quantum mechanics or wave functions or superposition of states. So they just think it seems so fantastic. No, in reality, I may be totally wrong, and it just may have been an instantaneous, it's perfect, now bang, a crack happens on the supernatural foundation of the universe, and that instantly changes the whole universe that way, in a supernatural way. I don't know. Bottom line is that we cannot use today's scientific narrative and extrapolate that back to what the world would have been like before the fall. We have no idea. Not only that, if things are genetically deteriorating and it took generations, 1,000 or 2,000 years or thousands of years to reach the state we're at today, then that changes a lot of stuff as well.
Okay, and it's not just humans that everything is changing. Animals, we've got plants that are different than they would have had. And so even in how the plants have deteriorated over time would impact how long people can live, those kind of things.
Yeah, and this is what we observe in science. In fact, let's say, for example, I have a paper here on the fruit fly, normally in science known as Drosophila. Well, what we're seeing here is that there's a general genome-wide deterioration of the fruit fly happening. We look at, let's say, bacteria, and there's a general genome-wide deterioration of bacteria happening as well. Bacteria are typically not only accumulating mutations, but they're losing DNA, and same with fruit fly. Now, there's hopefully enough in each generation to reproduce, but that percentage gets smaller and smaller over time until you reach a threshold where there's no longer enough viable members of a particular species to reproduce. Excuse me.
All right. Speaking of bacteria, grab that coffee. Have another chug of that stuff. Coffee, the solution to a lot of genes mutating negatively. All right, so let's go back. So Adam and Eve, the fall happens. In Christian terms, we call it the fall. And one of my favorite stories is you've got Adam who sees God coming or senses God coming down the trail. He's made this mistake. It goes from spiritual or super state to simple state. Let's pretend that happened or assume it happened. He knows he did something wrong. Guilt has entered the picture. And he goes, I'm naked. Why is that the issue for him?
That is a fascinating question. Like, why would his nakedness, Adam and Eve's nakedness, be an issue? I mean, they've been running around buck naked for, since they were made, and no problem having times with God in that Garden of Eden that God had created for them to live within on this earth. So all of a sudden it's a problem, and I can only speculate, Sheldon. I can only speculate, but I do have an educated speculation here, and the informed speculation is based on the observation that later on in the Bible, and particularly in the New Testament and in the Old, God has quite an interest, or it's quite important, of what we do. What sort of how we use our sexuality is very important, and so why? Like I've read online, like people say this is just absurd. Like we don't make up rules for dogs or cows or whatever. So what's going on here? But it goes back to, I think, it goes back to us being created in the image and likeness of God. Now, people would say image of God, and they tend to look at themselves in the mirror and, okay, head, 2 arms and legs. But you're only looking at a human being here, and God is more than just Jesus Christ was, it says, in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. So if you have a Trinity, a God who exists in three persons but one, the aspect of the Trinity that we can see and interact with in the physical world is Jesus. It says all the fullness of deity dwells in him in bodily form. He is the exact he's a model, or he's how we see God physically. But you're only seeing the physical representation of God. You don't see the soul and the spirit aspect of God, the 2 other persons of the Trinity. But when you do, you begin to suspect that, well, bottom line is this, and this will probably be a whole show itself, but what I think he means by image and likeness of God is that we also are formed as a let's say a tripart being. We have a body, soul, and spirit. And it refers to that quite clearly in the New Testament. He says that's what makes a complete human. If someday in eternity you'll be complete body, soul, and spirit. So the body is where our sexuality is. But if you look at the Trinity, the Father is kind of like the soul of God, so to speak. So Jesus says, I don't say anything but what the Father speaks through me, so to speak. It's kind of like Jesus would say, I have a mind, but that mind is the Father. The Father is my mind, so to speak, for anything that I do and say. And it was the same for the Spirit. So God desires a human being to be the same way. That is, our soul must rule over our body and our spirit. But the body is where our sexuality is. And in our culture today, people don't actually, a lot of them don't believe in the existence of a soul, or they think we're just a body. And if you're just a body, then what your body wants, it doesn't really make sense to deny it unless it really wants something unhealthy. So basically the body ends up ruling the human being. It becomes like an animal. It's what I would call the animalization of humanity. When a person, the soul is the you. You are created as an eternal living soul, but the Bible explains that your body it uses terms like clothing, jar of clay, a tent, a house. Your body is what you dwell within. but you are not your body. Your body is a key, critical part of you. It's part of that tripart aspect of you. But you have a body, you have a soul first and foremost, and a body and a spirit. So this is where sexuality comes in, is that the sexuality provides the great war against the soul. In fact, God says that. It talks about our fleshly lusts wage war against the soul. So there's actually a battle going on with a human being between the soul and our physical urges. And so when Adam and Eve sinned, that began the battle. Something went wrong, not just in the physical world, but God says the day you sin, you will surely die. But you read the account and they were still alive the next day. In fact, they lived for centuries afterwards. But the Bible also talks about another kind of death, which is more like a spiritual death. Something inside of Adam and Eve died. This is where they start feeling guilt. They start experiencing the war between the sexuality and the soul. And the soul must win, but in our culture today, the opposites happen. The body has triumphed over the soul. So that's the way I suspect that they became sensitive about their nakedness. Just an educated speculation.
Yeah, it's like they didn't put a hat on. They didn't like find a paper bag and put it over their head like a Maple Leafs fan would in the playoffs. But
you just made some enemies there.
Well, hey. Am I saying anything false here?
Go Jets, as far as I'm concerned. But some of the viewers.
I'm a Bruins fan, so I'm allowed to make the playoff joke about the Leafs because it's usually the Bruins that knock them out. Okay, so fall happens. They get kicked out of the garden, and we haven't been able to find the Garden of Eden since because
you won't. It's destroyed.
Pretty gone.
Destroyed in blood.
Now the tree of life. We talked a little bit. You're not allowed to eat from that, but they ate from the tree of the knowledge, they're not allowed to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Mm-hmm. They could eat from the tree of life.
I suppose there was. I don't recall there being any prohibition against it prior to the fall.
So the fall allows the fall to get kicked out because they can't eat from the tree of life, but they've eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so when God created humanity, he created them without even the knowledge of sin.
Yeah, they didn't even know what that was.
And the temptation was, you want to know what that is because then you could be like God.
You will know the difference between good and evil. And that Hebrew word know is kind of a loaded word. I mean, to us, it just means you will have a piece of knowledge here and you'll be able to have some data. But in Hebrew, the word is yodea, and it means to have intimate experience of. You will intimately experience the difference between good and evil. It's the same word used when God says Adam knew his wife. It means Adam had intimate physical experience of his wife. And when Satan says you will know the difference between good and evil, they didn't even know what that meant. Like they had no idea about what Satan was saying, and he knew they wouldn't understand at the time. You will have intimate experience of good and evil. Now, for us today, that is the worst. That is the nightmare of civilization, is this intimate experience of particularly evil. And we're experiencing, like I look at what's going on in Europe, I'm just grieving. I just like, wow. Like if anybody thought humanity is inherently good, oh man, it just seems that we still have not solved this problem that's been going on throughout human history. It just goes on and on. And this is why Jesus of Nazareth came, because he actually has a permanent solution to the problem.
Okay, so before we get into that, so my daughters are I got two in high school now. One's graduating this year. I got another one going to be joining high school next year. But this year, one of my daughter's assignments was to create a utopia. So describe what a utopia looks like. So I'm thinking, okay, the only utopia we experienced was the garden at one point. We couldn't handle that. Can humanity create a utopia? Or is there something that was been passed on from Adam that makes us inherently not good.
Yeah. The issue is where there's a deadness inside of us. People, like, the Bible just says there's this problem of internal death, not physical death, but more of a spiritual death. And so, in effect, let's illustrate it this way. Imagine you have a friend come over to watch a good football game, and you go in to make some nachos, and you come back in the living room, and your friend is dead, but you grew up with this person. You're close, and you love this person, but they're now physically dead in your living room. So what happens? Well, you can't leave them in the living room over a period of days and weeks. It's going to create a physical health problem. It's going to create a medical problem. In the same way, a spiritual death within humanity, there is a spiritual decomposition or decay that's happening. And the Bible talks a lot about that. And you will see, just as in a physical death, you will start to detect problems, like, say, for example, there'll be lots of problems, smell, bacteria, disease. In the same way, you can detect spiritual death by looking at the news. Just read the news every day. And the things that human beings are doing to each other and doing to themselves are all symptoms of a spiritual decay. So it is impossible, just as it's impossible for a dead physical person to design a real excellent fitness program so that you can become an Olympic competitor. They're dead. They're not even going to get to square one when it comes to designing a fitness program. In the same way, the spiritually dead are not even going to get to square one when it comes to designing a utopia. Now, I might be a little harsh there because all of us can imagine a much better world, but the key word is much better. That's not what a utopia is. It's not just much better. In my mind, a part of utopia would be a world where there has never been evil and never will be evil. There isn't even the memory of evil, and you won't even know what that is anymore. I don't want, like, once you've seen enough, and the older you get in life, I've seen more than enough, and what's going on in Europe right now is just icing on the cake, if you want to use the word icing for such heinous stuff. You just say, I don't even want to remember this. Like, I don't want to live in a world that has this stuff going on, even if it's much better. Because go ahead.
Yeah, I was even thinking, okay, so what's going on in Ukraine is one thing, but just in my lifetime, there's been Rwanda. There's been 9/11. There's been a lot of wars that have been fought with people that had, I think, there's some good intentions behind them, trying to eradicate evil. And in fact, that's what Putin's excuse is right now, is to cleanse the Nazi factor from Ukraine. So we've got this idea that, okay, if we just eradicate the problem, or the root of the problem. I remember Kamala Harris doing her tour of the States, or of South America, to figure out what the root of the problem is for the immigration issue at the U.S. border in Mexico. Well, we just need to solve the root of the problem. Mm-hmm. Hunger, crime, whatever the root of the problem is. If we just solve that, we can make a better world.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, when it comes to all the garbage that's going on in the world, the root of the problem is human nature itself. Like, I just have to look back at my own, like, I just, like, it's just appalling. It's facepalm bad to look back at some of the things I have said to people and some of the pain and suffering I have caused just from things I've said without thinking through what I'm saying, so to speak. Sometimes it's been intentional. And so I look back at the pain and suffering I have caused in this life to other individuals. I have human nature as well. The root of the problem is human nature. So if you want to eradicate the root of the problem, wipe humanity off the face of the planet. Let's get rid of them. And I know that some people have a problem with that. The big question, like, a lot of people say, why does God allow this and that? My question is, why doesn't he wipe us out? Like, why does he even allow us to exist? That's the problem. But as I mentioned in the previous previous live stream, God actually cares for us. Like, it's like you have children and they've really gone off the deep end here, but you have a way to bring them back onto what's right and good. And so there's that option here. But you can't wipe out evil. You can't get, as long as there's going to be human beings in the present state of affairs, somehow you have to completely put in a new person inside of me. You have to have a whole new human nature, not the old one, a new one. And that's exactly what Jesus says he creates within a person. What he meant when he says you have to be spiritually reborn. In this life, there has to be a point where a whole new nature is created within you that's flawless and beautiful and perfect. Now, unfortunately, as long as you live in this life, the old decaying nature is still there, but at least you have a choice how you're going to live now. It's going to be a battle, true, but on death, that old nature goes down with the body. And in the resurrection, you have a new, immortal, amazing body and a flawlessly perfect nature within you. And there'll be no more of what we see going on in this world.
So let's go back again to the start. Sin enters the picture. We got the fall. The spirit of Adam and Eve are dead.
I'm not sure quite how he says we're dead, and he's using it in a spiritual sense. Are we talking about the spirit or the soul? Now, we tend to say dead means it doesn't exist anymore. No, when a body's dead, it's still there, which is why we need a cemetery. And when a soul or a spirit, when there's a spiritual death, there's still this spirit, this nature within us. It's still there, but it's rotting, it's decomposing in a spiritual sense, in a moral sense.
So where I'm trying to get at here is when the seed is passed from parent to child, it talks about that nature, that spiritual death being passed, correct?
That is a subject of controversy. Like we're talking what the concept of original sin here. And so when a child is conceived, they're already, sin. But what is that? And it appears that, well, that could be a whole program by itself, original sin, because what happens is, one thing we do know is that the moment that child is conceived, it's going to die at some point. It's going to die. And so in that sense, the consequences of sin is physically passed on to the child. Physically, it's going to die. There's no immortal children around. But when it comes to the spiritual death, it seems to imply in, let's say, Romans chapter 2, that it's when a person intentionally commits a moral violation. And so the question is there a period of time in an infant's life where it's not spiritually dead? And there could be an argument in terms of this is a whole show by itself, but we know in the Bible that some infants do appear to be spending eternity with God. Maybe all of them, for all we know. We don't know that, but we know that at least David's son by Bathsheba, the first one there, he would be with that child once he died, which suggests that the child was. So I don't even want to get too far into this because
I was going more into Jesus not having that, having not been born of man.
Yeah, he didn't have an earthly father, a physical father, and my wife and I were just discussing this actually last night. Why did Jesus not have a physical father? And my answer, and I use the term answer loosely here, I don't claim to be right, is that basically Jesus is God. So he had to come from God in one sense, but he also had to be very physical. So he had to be physically conceived and born of a woman. So, as soon as he was physically conceived by a woman, the question is, well, is he going to physically die then? And probably yes. I mean, he would have all the mutations in his mother's DNA, unless God fixed those up. But
so that was going to be one of my next questions then, because when Jesus was walking around, he wasn't walking around as this perfectly genetically created being.
No.
He was created with all of humanity in its current state.
Yeah, including its aches and pains. It says he was tempted in all that we are, yet without sin. So he would have had to experience a real human body that's not a superhuman body. It's just a normal one that gets tired, gets colds, maybe gets the odd bout of food poisoning, whatever you get in first century Israel. So he would have physically died at some point, probably, just because of that. But the plan was, of course, that he wouldn't die of old age. He would lay his own life down. No, some would argue he would have never physically died because he never sinned. Well, that's true, but then a baby who's conceived and dies in the first trimester of pregnancy never sinned either. Yet that baby already dies in the first trimester. So, but that's okay. We're getting back into that sort of thing. Let's get back out of that now.
We can play around with some ideas on that in a future episode, because that's when it gets really interesting.
So much to talk about.
So let's take a look at back to last episode. We talked about why did all this happen. So I watched this video last night of the Savannah Bananas. It's a minor league baseball team in Savannah, Georgia, and they've been upending what it looks like to play baseball. The guy bought this minor league team and just turned everything upside down. But he's got a 5-year vision video up there that is actually quite amazing to watch. And I'm thinking, what is God's vision? Why did he do all of this? If it's love, which I think we talked about last time, he did it because he loves and he wants relationship. And so if he creates this world, he creates humanity, it's perfect, but he puts this you used a term earlier when it puts a catalyst in place that is a temptation. It's the way that all of this can get destroyed.
I'm not sure I would say it's a temptation. The temptation was offered by Satan. Prior to that point, it wasn't even a temptation.
But he put in play the don't eat here. He put a rule in place.
Yeah, a rule.
Not to eat of that tree.
Yeah.
And so why would he have done that? Does that not say he's putting free will into play here?
Yeah. I mean, he's putting free will into play. He knows that ultimately every human being is going to fall and sin. So right off the bat, he cannot create us in our immortal, eternal state with our full godlike capabilities, which he says it has not even entered the heart of a human being to understand what those are. He cannot create us like that, because if those things went evil, if a fully immortal human with all its eternal capabilities went rogue, went wrong, the evil that could be unleashed is unimaginable. So he cannot do that. Instead, he creates us in a form that when we fail the test, which we all would eventually, we go into a mortal state where now we can come to grips with the fact that we are not perfect. We got a problem. We're going to die. We do all sorts of wrong things. And what's the solution here? Well, the solution is, let me stop there. I'm getting off track here. It was more to do with love, I think, wasn't it?
Well, okay. So if I think of God's vision for this planet, it's to have relationship with people that actually love him and not are robots. They aren't just doing it because that's what they were created to do.
Yeah, well, that's not love. I mean, if I slipped some sort of mind-altering drug into, like say the woman I'm married to now, I've been married for 40, let's see, it'll be 42. And, but let's say I saw her in the university cafeteria, and I just wanted to speed this process. Total stranger sitting over there. That is some fine looking woman. She's not likely to marry me like in the next 10 minutes because she doesn't even know who I am. So I will put some stuff in here so that she will do whatever I suggest she do. That would be perverted. That would be sick. That's not love, because I have interfered with her free. Love is meaningless in those circumstances. It's not even love. I could program my computer to say I love you each morning when I wake it. That is absolutely bogus. So God had to give us first of all, he made us like himself so that love would be on the same level. But he's made it in a two-phase approach so that we can preempt the full eternal being like human going rogue. So we're in this phase here now, and the idea is that we have to choose whether we want God or not. That's this life here. We have to make that decision. Of course, we're not making it in a vacuum. In fact, if he just left us to our own devices, none of us would even, probably be aware we need to make such a choice. So anyways, he intervenes in the life of each individual person who's ever lived. And to make them conscious, first of all, that they do wrong things and that there's at least a creator out there and there's some serious problem. And they need to ultimately put their faith in God to deal with this problem. That's in the simplest way of saying it. And the whole idea here is that God does not need us to love him. The most important thing to God, he says, is love. But as the Trinity, we know that there is flawless, like Jesus talked about the Father loving the Son, and he wants us to know that we can be loved to that same magnitude. But when you have something absolutely flawless and beautiful, but you don't need these things, it still is a good thing if you can multiply love. You can multiply the beings to experience this sort of thing. So like when Patty and I were first married for the first year, we were just having we don't need kids. We don't need those. But there reached a point in our marriage where, it does seem that it would be the right thing to do to bring more children into this world that can have the possibility of experience what I and my wife experience, a true, beautiful love between two people. And not just between her and I, but between siblings, parents, friends. So God brought us into existence in his own image and likeness so our love would be at the highest level. But he also had to give us free will so that the love would actually be possible. Love without free will is simply not possible. It is a programmed, determined response that means nothing.
So this is a response to somebody that had messaged in on our website. And those of you who are watching this, please comment, please subscribe, like the video and stuff. It helps us. But if you want to talk to somebody, if you're going through some stuff in your life, or you want to even have a discussion about some of the stuff we're talking about, and you want to do that more of in a private way, go to kirkdurston.com, click the talk to us, and get a mentor that way. But I was responding to a guy who asked, sort of made a statement in his initial message to us, and he said, "There is no God. Religion is shit." And so my response was, I'd really love to hear how you decided there is no God, but I totally agree with you with that religion stuff, because that's a human thing. And humans are really not good at doing anything well. And most often when somebody has a complaint, they'll deny there's a God, but then they'll give me a lot of reasons why God can't exist, because they're expecting, if there's a God, that God would be his word was omnibenevolent, so always good. And I said, well, as a father, I have young girls, and I could lock them in their room and keep them from experiencing anything bad in this life, assuming the house doesn't burn down. I can give them food, I can play with them, but as soon as they leave the house, things can go wrong. They can get hit by a car, they can make a mistake, they can run out into run out into traffic, they get hit by lightning, whatever it is, bad stuff can happen outside of the walls of their room. Is it a good father that would lock their child up and not allow them to make a mistake? Or is it an evil father that does that kind of stuff? And so that in my mind, he really didn't have an answer to that. But when I think of love, it's allowing people to make decisions without locking them up.
Yeah, I think of what I see in that question that the fellow raised is what I often see, and that is we often tend to create an idea of God in our head that's very human-like. So the kind of God you have in your head, well, why doesn't God do it this way? Because that's how I would do it. And if he's perfectly benevolent, why doesn't he do that? Because that's how I would do it. But they often don't think about higher level issues that surround that. Let's say, for example, if we just want pets, then if God just wanted pets, just to keep a bunch of pets in a nice planet so you come play with us sometimes, then maybe a benevolence would look quite a bit different than what it does. But what if there's higher level things? What if we can actually interact with God at a higher level than just being a pet? In this case, God may have to give us an arena within which we can experience not just opportunity, but the need to make higher level decisions when things aren't going right. We might need to learn what moral responsibility is. We might need to learn just how evil humanity can get, so that we then appreciate how much the other option. So we then see we're not God. Basically, we're not God. In fact, I think he puts us here. One of the big reasons God has put us in this mortal world is that the one sin we know in the Bible that was committed in the presence of God was when the chief of the cherubim got so impressed with himself that he became basically, I'm like God. Well, the chief of the cherubim isn't anything as impressive as what the immortal eternal human will be. So the immortal eternal human beings could become very impressed with themselves. So somehow God has to preempt that. He puts us in this world where things are going terribly wrong, and we see, the idea that I'm God, that's not even a joke. It's not even like, it's so wrong. Like, it's painfully obvious I'm not God to myself and probably to anybody who knows me. And when I look around at humanity, it's painfully obvious that humanity is going in the wrong direction. Like, we are not God. And once we get that dealt with off the table, then we're in a position to start having a personal relationship with God, because it's a form I would say it's a form of insanity that we think we're God that has to be dealt with. Yet, and we can discuss this in another episode, I see this kind of insanity happening in our culture today, where they're not saying we're God, but all the things they're doing is like, we don't need God to do this. We can handle it just fine ourselves, and so on and so forth. That is another way of, okay, you're not saying you're God, but you're actually feel that you are. You don't need God. You can do it perfectly fine yourself. So that has to be dealt with us in this world. And the only way to deal is, okay, then let's provide an arena where we can see what happens, humans, when you go down that road. And unfortunately, and sometimes if you have strong-willed kids, you sort of sometimes have to let them make the wrong decisions, so that then they can see, oh, these are the consequences. because they're just not going to take your word for it. I mean, anybody who's raised kids is going to have probably one or two that just simply don't take your word for it. They're going to have to learn the hard way. And that's what humanity is doing right now. We are learning the hard way.
And right from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like this is a new thing.
No. All right. So we're out of an hour. So let's start talking a little bit more about God's solution to all this in the next episode. Kirk, you talked a little bit about, okay, what is the resurrection and stuff, and God's plan for this all come into play. And I think the next episode will be a good one to work on that. And then maybe the episode after we'll bring a special guest in to talk about some of the objections to what we'll talk about next week. So thanks, Kirk. Good chat. Really enjoy digging into some of this stuff. And yeah, so again, if you're watching, please like, subscribe, and comment. Even though this is pre-recorded, we will be I'll probably be on a plane looking at the comments coming through, and I know Kirk will as well. And ask questions, debate us on stuff. We love to have the conversation. So we will do this again next week. See you later, Kirk.
We'll see you later.